Well met. This has been Brode, and you're watching Born to be Cosmo. Oh, snap.
Born to be
Cosmo.
Welcome to Born to be Cosmo, the podcast where we talk about all things Marvel Snap on, of course, a flexible broadcast schedule. I am joined by my two co-hosts, Nate Wolfe, ZombiesGoNomNom. We're also joined tonight by the best Marvel Snap player you probably never heard of, a wild and standard Tempo Storm meta snapshot contributor, and all-around card game savant, nhlnjfan1 fan, good friend of us all. Thank you for joining us tonight. It's awesome to have you here, and I think we got you on an awesome night because we have a stacked agenda.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you back in the States for a while. That'd be great.
Yeah. Little known fact, NHL moves between the United States and a country in Northern Europe, and when not located in the United States, we're on a pretty polarizing schedule there. So it is awesome that you have a little bit more flex and can join us tonight.
Yeah, it's been a while. I've been wanting to, and now that I have the chance, I'm glad I can come on.
Awesome.
Well, I talked about a flexible podcasting schedule, and Second Dinner's been talking about flexible series drops. And just today, right before the show, they flexed on us by announcing the next round of series drops.
I thought it would never happen.
Thought it would never happen. And I have to say, here's the good thing about having exceedingly low expectations. It's quite easy to surpass them. And in fairness, so credit where credit's due, I actually think that, this is a little bit more, there's a little bit more substance here than in the last series drop. So, let's just go through it. So we've got what looks like 7 cards that are dropping from Series 5 to Series 4, which is pretty huge because every new release of late, seemingly, has felt like Series 5. What was the last Series 4 card? Was it Man-Thing?
No, it was Meek in January.
Beginning
of January, I think.
Wow.
Well, dropping into Series 4, we have Jean Grey, which has been seeing some play in a deck that we'll talk about a little bit later.
I wonder if they put her before or after she started play. Like, what if they locked her in because, if she's not seeing play, we can drop her, and then she becomes popular. It's funny.
I hope you're wrong, but part of me believes the same. The next card, this is probably the biggest one of them all. This is a archetype defining card, the Living Tribunal. Also one that I do not have and have been a bit sore about. The Meta Tyrant Hercules, not really. That one was probably the weakest release in recent memory.
Even they buffed it and it still doesn't see play.
He's so bad. He doesn't even work in like the one deck he should work in, which is like the old Heimdall move. Like that deck is better without Hercules.
Yeah.
Feels bad.
Selene, a very niche card for the junk archetype. Gladiator. This is another big one too.
Gladiator's very good.
Archetype defining card. It's just a real solid include in a lot of decks. So that's a really nice one to see.
Mm-hmm.
Nebula, one of the best 1-drops in the game. Really good to see that one too. Fits in a lot of different decks, so very versatile card. And Silk, which is also a pretty decent card. A little more niche and specific, but still sees play. So pretty nice drops from Series 5 to Series 4. That's going to go live on the next patch in early June. So just be warned that while it was announced today, it'll be several weeks until we can take advantage of this.
Yeah, so don't buy or open for these cards until then if you want to. I think Gladiator is coming up, so you could still get him in a cash week. You're not losing out necessarily. You're gonna get him anyway, but like
Tribunal's next week, and now if you were gonna open for Tribunal like I was, now I'm probably gonna hold off.
Yeah, just get it for tokens. Yeah, because it's a lot less bad. And then the 4s to 3s, It's kind of an interesting bunch. I feel like the exciting thing about this is these cards will never be in spotlight caches again, and that's good because I don't think anyone was super happy when these were showing up.
I mean, I wanted to see Null again, but oh wait, it's not actually in that list. Never mind. My favorite
Yeah.
spotlight card will continue to grace us with its presence.
You didn't see the null buff where they
Null
added
buff.
the can't be series dropped onto its text.
Oh, so now
Darkhawk and Zabu.
So now it's a big Jeff along with Jeff.
Yeah. Oh, it's more like a medium Jeff because it's
mid
series
Jeff.
4. But yeah, I think they essentially have like doubled down on the all right, we need spotlight caches to have cards people actually want to get. It's like there's like I feel like there's a competing like battle of interests for the spotlight caches because on one hand, like the spotlight caches impact newer people a lot as well, right? So like I don't know how many new people are playing Snap. That's something we don't really get much of a look into in terms of like content creation. I find like they could have a lot of new players, they could have not a lot of new players. I don't know, but it feels like they want to keep offering these cards periodically so people can have access to like they're like archetype defining cards, right? Like Null is you need that to play Destroy, you need Modok to play Discard, etc. And so I feel like they want to keep bringing these back because new players, that's the only way they can get them reasonably, right? Like new players aren't going to have the resources in the token shop, so they have to rely on the caches. But then it sucks for older players because it's like, I've seen this like 8 times, dude. Please make it stop. Like it's just it's a flaw with the cache system.
Yes, it is. But it is nice to see some new cards in Series 3. They're not all, meme tier.
No, they're actually mostly, I think aside from Howard, every one of these cards is playable. I mean, you can play Howard in the ongoing deck if you really want to. I wouldn't recommend it, but that deck probably won't be that much worse if you run Howard. So like they're all pretty playable. But a lot of people skip these cards, right? So for those people, they're winning on this one. But the Series 3 bloat kind of continues, and I feel like they're gonna need to find a way to like improve that a bit for people because someone in my comments did the math, right? And Series 5 bloat and 4 bloat is also a really big issue with this because we're getting 52 cards a year and then 12 more from the battle pass, 64 cards a year. If we're dropping 15 cards to Series 3 a year with 3 yearly series drops, the size of Series 4 and 5 is going to get really, really big. It's already 30% of the game. 30% of the cards in the game are Series 4 and 5 cards right now, which is crazy.
Ouch. Yeah.
All right. Would you guys like estimates and numbers in terms of revenue?
Sure.
So, since between October 18th, 2022, when it released,
Mhm.
and all of 2023, okay, they generated 116.7 million in revenue.
Jeez.
So last year they generated about 8 to 9 million per month on average. Okay, and December 22 was its peak month where they made $13.8 million. All right.
Mm-hmm.
This year, they're estimated about $3 million a month on iOS and $2 million on Google Play. So they're making, add the PC players and maybe what, 5-6 million a month
Yeah, that's
this month. Like
Wow.
it's a
Not
huge
bad.
drop off already. But
But-
it's still a big drop off.
Yeah, percentage wise, it's a very large drop off. It's like
But in absolute
as-
terms,
50%.
it's still pulling in a lot.
A ton of money.
Yeah, so we can look at like 3-4 million a month in 2025, maybe 2 million a month 2026, and so on. I mean, their goal is to make this game last 10 years, and I don't want to get into that. But that is how the numbers. Yeah, that's a topic for another time. We have a lot to discuss, but that's how the numbers are right now for you guys to know, like who's playing, who's spending, just to have an idea. It's not as much as before, but there are still a lot of people.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, it's something to think about for sure.
Yeah.
Anyways, for those who are listening, apologies. We didn't read out the Series 4 to Series 3 card drops. So we've got Martyr, Silver Samurai, Howard the Duck, like Zombies mentioned, Mirage, and Echo. Some pretty decent cards. They're pretty niche, but they're important pieces for decks, save for Howard. I don't own Martyr. I'm kind of happy to finally get it. I can't tell you how many times I've swapped him Ant-Man for Martyr, and before the Ant-Man buff was like,
Yeah, it just
struggling at
doesn't
one point. Yeah.
work the same, really. And use your free redeem for this instead of caches if you can. I know a lot
Right.
of people forget about it, but you can redeem a free Series 3 card every month. So you don't gain that much by it, but you probably get like an extra 100 tokens or something.
Yeah. Yeah. So, anyways, that was just announced today, and yeah, I just thought we'd open with that.
Yeah.
I guess working backwards in time, it's the 13th, the day of broadcast, May 13th, and on May 9th, a significant balance patch dropped. And I think what's interesting about this balance patch is that, I mean,
Feels longer.
yeah, well, there was the patch that was released the week prior that had no balance changes, which kind of got a
Yeah.
bit of an uproar, which I never really understood. But but a lot of changes were made in this patch that I think we weren't expecting. So the only change, frankly, that I was expecting was the first one, a little bit of a nerf to Lady Deathstrike. Lady Deathstrike has been incredibly powerful since it was buffed to 7 power with a flat destroy cards here with a power of 3 or less. It's included in several top decks. It fits nicely in with the Annihilus package, which has been very strong. And overperforming, I suppose, by their metrics. They took a power off of it, taking it from 7 to 6. Still destroys everything with 3 or less power at that location. And that's reciprocal, right? It's on both sides. That hasn't changed either. Yeah, so Lady Deathstrike. I'm not sure there's a whole lot to say about this. The card's still top.
Yeah, I don't know. This feels like. I feel like this whole patch was them saying, "Hey, I think we should tone down these Annihilus and Cannonball decks without actually toning down a lot of the cards that make those decks exist." That's what this felt like to me, because Deathstrike and Darkhawk were both very popular in the Annihilus decks, and then Leech is like good versus Annie, it's good versus Cannonball. So I felt like they were going for nerfs for things that weren't actually like the cards they nerfed, which is weird. But
pretty much expected at this point. I mean, it's not always a given, but it's happened numerous times.
it's weird that they just chose to take a point of power from these cards. Like, it left them good still, so I'd rather they do that than Zabu them. But like, it's weird.
The deck with the highest win rate, or the archetype rather, excuse me, with the highest win rate in Top Infinite is still the Lady Deathstrike Darkhawk deck. So it's still good.
Wait, it runs both?
Some of them run both, yeah.
That's crazy, because if you're running a Nihilus too, it's like 3/5s. Usually they pick the Darkhawk package or the Deathstrike one, but they're both popular.
Yeah. So that was the other card. And this was not expected, but kind of was a bit of a meh. Darkhawk also got the 1-point shave treatment, going from a 5/4 down to a 5/3. I haven't played much Darkhawk, frankly, since they made Darkhawk a 5, but the card was performing well, and I suppose better than I thought.
Better than everyone thought. I don't think anyone saw this change and was like, whoa, yeah, good thing they nerfed Darkhawk. That card was overperforming. It feels like the Black Bolt stature thing, except with less crazy stats, where it was like,
yeah,
people were surprised by the nerf. Because
I'll never forget it was like a year and a half ago, when they first introduced Series 5 with Darkhawk,
mm-hmm.
and NHL opened it in a cache. This was even before they had the tokens, and you were so upset that you got Darkhawk. You're like,
because you didn't have the other cards to use it, right?
Well,
Like,
yeah, well,
it felt useless at the time, and it still took me almost 2 months.
Yeah, but you had it in January, so you had it when it counted.
Not many people had Darkhawk on release. That was a card like, because Korg and Rockslide were viewed as really bad cards back then. So people were like, is this payoff really worth it? The context of the game was different too. Darkhawk released during Zabu winter, so like it wasn't making a splash for most people. Most people just didn't have the card.
Yeah.
But it was in the best Zabu deck by far. I felt like
Yeah,
I was really sure that you guys had it and I didn't. I felt like I had like a more of an uphill climb because of that. It's not because you're better at the game than me, which you are, but it was because you had the card I didn't own. So it was like insult to injury.
Yeah, it's crazy. It was a 4-1. Can we appreciate how it was originally a 4-1? They made it a 4-0. Then they made it a 5-4. Now it's a 5-3.
Bring it back.
Oh, I would like them to bring back the old Darkhawk, but if their stats are correct, it's probably too much of a menace, which makes me sad because it really, I never really disliked Darkhawk that much or felt it was that crazy, but I don't know.
Me neither, and I was the big like lockjaw during the 4-5 rock slide and 4-0 Darkhawk era. So I thought it was fine. But they changed this before they changed Zabu, and it's still good, and it puts it in line with Ronin and Dino, and I don't know.
Yeah,
You know what?
It's
The
fine.
moral of the story here is that nothing lasts forever, and I have no doubt that they'll change Darkhawk as well as all these cards again sometime in the future.
Oh, always.
Probably, yeah. It seems likely at this point. The funny thing about Darkhawk was I saw so much more of it after the patch than I did before the patch, and
Yeah,
that's like a first.
because Glenn said, "Hey, this card is the best card in the game," and everyone was like, "Oh, really?" And there you go. And it turns out it's still really good.
Indeed.
All right, so now we're going to enter into the buffs portion of the patch, also known as the things that no one asked for. Starting with Leech. Leech, our favorite little guy, got buffed from a 5-3 to a 4-2. So now, with an on-reveal 4-2, will nuke all the on-reveal cards in your opponent's hand. And then, on turn 5, you can play the Battle Pass card Blink and swap out Leech for, I don't know, Red Hulk. This is like real, like
Magneto.
like a reflection of like the old school Thanos Lockjaw, where like Leech would get dumped into Lockjaw, and it was just like, haha, LOL. Except it's even more consistent because Lockjaw could pull out a Thanos stone or your Wasp or whatever, whereas Blink will be a card of equal or greater cost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's no, it's not equal or greater. It's just greater.
Just greater, even better. I don't even know
it's
what the card
insane.
does. I just slam it on 5 and watch the cubes pour in.
If you can build your deck in that way, where you can do like the Leech into Blink, it's really, really good. Although we do have to remember it's not quite as crazy as original Leech because it doesn't blank everything anymore. It only blanks on reveals, which that's still very impactful versus a lot of decks. But they've been getting pretty grilled for this one. A lot of people don't like Leech. I can understand that sentiment, but they're like, well, this is kind of trying to give more options for combating some of the more popular strategies or powerful stuff like Hela and Cannonball and Annihilus. Like, I feel like if they didn't do this Leech change, they probably would have nerfed at least some of those cards. Not Hela, because they can never nerf Hela.
Do you think they'll like bow to the peer pressure of like the feels bad? I don't think 4-2 Leech is going to last long term. I don't know how short term it will be. I don't think they're going to immediately cave, but
leave it for this season.
Yeah, maybe. I don't need. I'm up in the air about it, but I do think the response has been negative enough that they will not want to leave it this way for the long term, because this is the most annoyed I've seen people be about a card against. It's like Alioth or Old Leech, or like people just really hate this card.
Yeah. I played it the day that the OTA dropped, so on Thursday, and I swear I basically in an hour went from like 85 to infinite, and it was with Leech and Blink. And I think that it was a combination of the hot location and people just not like, I think they forgot how to play into Leech, because like it was like, it felt like it was December 2022 again when Silver Surfer came out. It was just Christmas morning. And I noted that I think people are going to really regret this change or not like it, and that seems to be the case. I don't know. I don't know how to feel about it, honestly. I think that you summed up my feelings best, Zombies. It feels like these changes are eating around something, and I'm not sure it's going to have the effect that they desired.
Yeah, because it does. There's just a lot of collateral damage, right? Like it hits those things they're talking about. Like, so that's kind of a positive thing because there is definitely less Annihilus, like a lot less Annihilus. In particular, there's still some Hela, but not a crazy amount of Hela.
A lot of Hela on
but it's like I think the frustrating thing for people is that a lot of decks that are decent but maybe not top tier get hosed especially hard by this, and so they're taking collateral damage to people trying to tech against more powerful or more popular decks.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a feels bad. I haven't seen a whole ton of it after the first few days, but I think that's also because ongoing is really popular right now, and Leech doesn't do anything versus ongoing. Or some of the other decks like Move and Loki. Like if you play those decks, you are so well insulated versus Leech. It's like you're happy they played a Leech. I mean, maybe a little less happy if they're trading it into a 5 or a 6 drop, but there are more decks around that can avoid this effect than I feel like there were in the past, where it's like, because you used to be like you leech, and if you were expecting your opponent to like try and be reactive or sometimes even do their thing with like Surfer or whatever, you just be like, all right, they can't do it anymore. I'm gonna snap. But I think Leech is no longer like, oh, I have this on curve, I'm gonna snap, unless you're in the right matchup.
Yeah, it's matchup dependent, but there's still a lot of combo decks, and I think that it can be like a game, a game-winning card against the right
Oh yeah,
matchup.
for sure.
Except against the combo darling Living Tribunal, but yeah.
Yeah, it
No,
doesn't work against Tribunal anymore, unless it's Hela Tribunal. It beats Hela Tribunal.
Yeah. Speaking from
If you're
experience,
playing the real version of Tribunal, not the
hey, Hela Tribunal was real for like the first few days of the season when everyone was playing like Blink Hela stuff. Or Blink Ramp with Hela, and then you played the Tribunal to outpower. That's how I finished my climb. It was nice.
Well, our favorite little guy is going to be at the center of conversation. Certainly has made an impact on the meta. Now we get to the buff portion I like to call the comedic interlude. Psylocke going from a 2-1 back to a 2-2 because, well, Thanos has been adequately obliterated to the Shadowlands, so clearly Psylocke can come back. And the next change, also, I got a real chuckle out of. Our favorite pterodactyl is once again a 3/3, down from the unplayable depths of being a 3/2, which was another 1 point off the top when Shuri Sauron was the top deck. So I don't know what you guys think of that. I don't care one way or another. I just was amused by it because they're not buffs, they're reverts. Although I suppose that's a distinction, but yeah, I don't know.
I think you summed it up pretty good in saying like the changes that nobody asked for. I mean, whatever.
There's someone was happy to see Sauron go back to being a 3/3.
Sure, and Psylocke was paying for the sins of Thanos as well, and it was. I mean, it's kind of goofy their methodology of balance.
I want to remind you guys, last year, Pterodactyl was probably the highest win rate card in the game.
Tian Ding was bragging about it, remember?
Yeah, and nobody played it. Nobody. You know why? Because it's boring.
Yeah.
Hey,
well, once Shuri got nerfed, nobody played it. Everyone played it until Shuri got nerfed.
Because Shuri is boring.
Yeah,
you only play Shuri when it's strong. It doesn't do anything actually fun and cool. Sure, you see big numbers.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's not fun, right?
Arguably, the Phoenix Force Nimrod stuff is fun, but that was
yeah, I love that stuff.
Yeah, but that's a bit different. The thing about this Shuri stuff, no one actually finds it all that like the majority of people don't find it all that fun. They prefer to play other things. why are we focusing our attention on something that people don't care to play?
I think they want padding. Like, I think they just when, especially if they're nerfing some cards, I think they like having more buffs than nerfs. So, like, what's an easy buff we can do that doesn't necessarily require much work? Oh yeah, these cards used to have an extra power. Let's give it back.
Are you saying, Zombies, that they're jingling their keys for us to like jump and grab?
Yes, we are Jingle Snap.
Jingle snap.
Also, has anyone seen a Sauron since this?
I think I've seen
I haven't.
one. I think I've seen
It's more than
one.
expected.
Need more
Nobody plays
Psylocke.
Shuri anymore. Yeah, Psylocke also. I mean, Thanos is playing it. People are playing Thanos again, but that's more because of Leech than Psylocke.
Thanos is performing okay. Just I like Thanos, not Quicksilver Thanos. I guess it's something I just have to get used to. But yeah,
We're waiting for the rework.
Yeah, I'm in the rework waiting room. Okay, the final two changes was the what? Excuse me? Changes. Born to be Cosmo, fan favorite card, Klaw.
Yep.
now projects 8 power onto the lane to the right, which is, it's pretty good considering that there's lots of like ongoing like multiplicative cards. I mean, Onslaught being the most kind of obvious one, and this last change, I honestly, this is wild, and I mean, it's cool that the deck's finally a force to be reckoned with. Ultron now makes 1/2 drones instead of 1/1 drones.
Oh, Ultron is pretty good now.
Yeah, I was giving Lee the rundown on Ultron and the deck play style before I hopped on here, telling Lee the same thing you told me, Zombies, that the drones are so strong. You have to ask yourself when you're playing Patriot now, is this card that's going to fill up this slot in the lane better than a 1/2 drone that gets buffed by Patriot? And that's kind of wild to think of. It is really strong now, and it's cool that Patriot's playable.
Yeah, because it was bad for like a long time. There were like some Mockingbird Patriot decks that were kind of okay, but like classic Patriot, which was like quite good when the game first came out, it was like a top deck, has been gone for a very long time because it just can't compete with like the power creep and like the new cards, and it fell by the wayside well over a year ago.
Yeah.
And it's nice to see them try and get Ultron back into it because Ultron's a cool character. Patriot's a neat archetype. It's better to have it around than not, I think. So the Klaw one's really surprising though. Like that really didn't see that coming.
Thank goodness for the Dan Hip Klaw variant, because I'm not sure I could stomach playing Klaw without.
Yeah.
Was Iron Lad a May card or an April card?
I want to say April.
Okay, so it was over a year, because I remember Patriot showing up after Iron Lad was printed.
Yeah, that we had. So there have been like different iterations, right? There was a while where like Iron Patriot was a thing where you got Lad and you ran some higher cost buff stuff, and that was a really good deck for a while. But none of them after, I feel like at that point, Patriot really changed as an archetype compared to like the old one because they just stopped running Ultron. Like Ultron, as soon as that card came out, I mean Ultron was kind of gone before then, but yeah, he was not a contender for Patriot, and now he is. Now Ultron sees more play than Doctor Doom, which is wild because Doom was like one of the better 6-drops, and now Ultron, if you're not filling out your lanes, you get a whole heck of a lot of power.
Yeah, card is good,
and it also gives people a Series 3 only deck that you can actually be relatively competitive with. Like I think someone hit 1 with a Series 3 only Patriot post Ultron. And that's pretty cool because a lot of the newer, or not newer, but a lot of the better decks often have a lot of more expensive Series 4, Series 5 cards. So it's nice that there's at least one where it's like you can get by with Series 3 cards if you have them.
Yeah, you absolutely need these kinds of decks for people to stick around.
Definitely. Like even like I was looking over a lot of the core archetypes, they all need at least 1 or 2 Series 4 or 5 cards, if not more. Like you have Destroy, where you need your Null, you need your X-23, your Nico, discard. It's like MODOK, Proxima. They all like they want to keep those cards up there because those are like desirable cards for the archetypes. So Patriot doesn't really have that, like at least these Ultron versions.
Well, why don't we shift and talk a little bit about the landscape that this, the meta landscape that this balance patch brought us. I think that the first deck really that we have featured is a Patriot deck, and there's a few different ways to build this. And I really thought, Zombies, you and I yesterday, we had a pretty lengthy discussion, and I really like the build that you settled on. I think the choices make a lot of sense. What we have on our screen here is the most played version. This was a list I think that Cam best tweeted out, and it's running Wasp, Ant-Man, Squirrel Girl, Pixie, Dazzler, Patriot, Brood, Mobius, and Mobius, Blue Marvel, Klaw, Onslaught, and Ultron. However, as this deck became more popular, Pixie Mobius became less of a surprise, and kind of positioning oneself to survive strategies that counter Patriot has become, you know, a little bit more prominent. So Zombies, why don't you talk a little bit about the changes you made to this list and why you think it's maybe slightly more heads up in this meta?
Well, the big thing is when there's a lot of Patriot, the flat Earth tech card is actually not so flat, and that is Super Scroll. It is an ongoing meta. There have been very few times in this game, I think, where we can say ongoing has been a real part of the meta. Like, it's really hard to think back to relevant ongoing times outside of. It's always been like Tribunal, right? Like Tribunal is kind of kicking around, but you never really saw Spectrum stuff, not many ongoing things. Like it just wasn't, these decks weren't very popular. They just weren't good enough to compete with a lot of the other strategies. And now they kind of are. And I think because it's so prevalent, not just other Patriots, but other good ongoing cards, it pays off a lot to lean into that. Like if you are, if you're playing Patriot Mirrors a lot, you have a lot to gain by playing Super Scroll in your deck. And everyone who knows me knows I hate Super Scroll conceptually. I do not like Super Scroll as a card. It's probably the last card I would ever recommend someone play in Marvel Snap, but it's just like, it's just good. Like, so I like going the Invisible Woman approach because one, it keeps people guessing on your output. Again, I don't typically recommend bluffing in Snap for most players, but I think you can kind of, like, you get value out of the fact that your opponent, like maybe they realize you're a Patriot and they're expecting Ultron, but they don't know, hey, is there a Patriot Mystique there? Is it a Blue Marvel and a Klaw? They can't easily figure out your output, and big cube equity gains because you can hide a Super Scroll there. And they're not going to be accounting for that extra power if they're also on Patriot. And then it also doubles as defense. As ongoing becomes such a core part of the meta, people are starting to realize, hey, that Enchantress card is pretty good. And Invisible Woman just isolates you from that weakness, where if you think you're running versus an Enchantress deck, she kind of says, get down, Mr. President, and takes the bullet, which I found to be nice. So I kind of prefer that approach a bit. I do think the Pixie Mobius stuff has more merit if you're not running into as many mirrors, and especially if you're running into more Lokis, because that deck, Loki's not like a terrible matchup, but sometimes it can be hard if they get a lot of your ongoing cards, most notably like Onslaught, Marvel, Claw, that kind of stuff. So Mobius kind of just doubles as, hey, Pixie lets me cheat a bit, and Mobius removes the downside and has some most location scam elements. But I prefer the Invisible Woman approach right now just because it's so popular.
There's another card that you include that I really like that's gotten cut, and that's Mystique. And I like the inclusion of Mystique, not because you can double up Patriot, although that does become relevant sometimes. I like it because now a matchup which is unwinnable, Living Tribunal, becomes beatable if you play Skrull into Mystique. And
yeah, you can
perhaps
compete
that's
with
not
them.
relevant for ladder.
It's not right now, at least.
But
But for
in
Conquest,
it feels essential. So viewers of Born to be Cosmo and my stream will know that the thing that gets me the most jumped up angry is queuing into Living Tribunal and Conquest and not having a card to like deal with it, because it's just the apex of absolute misery as you sit there just losing game after game because you don't have the answer. This is a way of getting that answer without having to really deviate from your game plan, which is pretty sweet.
I've also started using Lad there because basically a lot of these Patriot lists, they want a way to cheat out Onslaught sometimes so they can play both Onslaught and Ultron, because then your points just go nuts.
Yeah.
So I opted for Iron Lad. In this list we have here, Pixie is a way you can do it. Some people were running Wave in different versions, like Lambie had like a Go Tall version with Wave and Iron Man and stuff. I kind of like Iron Lad though. Obviously you have to be aware that sometimes you will hit Ultron and that is not necessarily good. It's not always bad, but it's not always good. But there are so many good hits in the Patriot deck where it's like if it hits Brood, you're super happy. If it hits pretty much any of your ongoing cards except maybe Mystique, and even sometimes Mystique, it's good if like if you played Patriot on 3. So I really liked the list. I haven't really missed Ant-Man a whole ton, just because I find a lot of the times you play Ant-Man because you don't have time to play him later, and then he ends up being similar power as a drone.
Yeah,
it's relevant in the games where you're like stacking an onslaught lane and then using Klaw, but outside of that, it felt kind of mediocre. So I haven't missed him too much because I feel like we get enough points with like Dazzler.
You can always add it back in for Lad or Skrull.
It's flexible.
I found I just wasn't playing it. It was just a brick a lot of the time. So Lad kind of can be clunky, but at least I felt Lad was nice as a Hail Mary if you didn't draw Ultron and you wanted to stay in.
I like that about it too. Like it gives you a chance to grab your key card or essentially the same effect. And there's so many good hits in the deck for Lad.
Yeah, it also gives you, I know that I keep referring to this niche matchup, but it gives you another possible double Skrull out in Tribunal. So it doesn't feel narrow. So it's pretty flexible. I think what's cool about Patriot is there's lots of viable builds and decisions, and many of the archetypes in Snap are kind of not really, you can't really flex a whole lot on the build, right? Like Sarah used to be a deck you could flex, but it doesn't exist anymore in a competitive space. Loki kind of has that flex. The others don't so much, right? So I think it's nice to have I think Patriot out of like the prefab archetypes, discard, destroy, like that kind of like built-in synergy, that kind of what we would call tribal synergy in Magic, or typo as they now refer to it as. It's probably the most interesting in its current form. Frankly, I wonder if Klaw and Ultron stay in its current state. I hope Ultron does.
I think they probably will. I mean, the big question is how good does Ultron do across like the larger player base? Because I don't think he's particularly like oppressive or anything. But if the stats are too high, I could see them knocking a little bit of power off of just the base body. Because they said that in the notes where it was like, yeah, he adds a lot of power now, so we might need to shave some off Ultron, but we're just gonna let it ride, and if it comes to that, we'll do it. I don't know if it will come to that or not. I personally think it's fine at 8, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're like, oh, we'll ding you a point or something, because they like those small point differences sometimes, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, the other deck that seems to be performing well across ladder is called Lockdown on Untapped, and many times it is a lockdown deck, although sometimes it has other cards flexed in that shares a lot of the same shell, but doesn't run Professor X. I find it actually kind of amusing that we have a well-performing lockdown deck that doesn't run X, and many of them.
This isn't even a lockdown deck. I think they're stuck categorizing it because of certain key cards, I would not call this a lockdown deck because you don't have any way to lock things down. Your only thing is White Widow.
Figuratively does, yeah. Leech and White Widow. I think that it's like it's halfway between Lockdown and Clog, which kind of occupies the same kind of space.
I don't know. I'm very surprised that this is what they classify as that, because I think there are other decks that fit this archetype way better and are also better decks. Like I feel like this is one where people probably jumped to it when they saw the Leech buff because they're like, hey, I want to play Leech and Blink and stuff and Jubilee. And I mean, these are a lot of good cards to do it with. I could see that. Also good weekend mission deck, but it surprises me something like this is so popular.
It's the number. It's the best deck on Untapped with a significant number of games. Top 10% infinite. Here, let me put the top 4 lockdown decks because the other ones, or at least half of them, I think are more in line with what I've come to expect from the archetype.
But the main one that's really good right now, and I'll see if I can post it, is there are a few different versions of it. Like I'll post mine, and then there's a version of it there that's similar to the one I run. They run X, I don't run X, but it's splitting hairs. And then Eva Zord just hit 1 with a similar list today. And if you like playing Lockdown, these are the versions I think are more competitive. You can do X Lockdown stuff too, and some of these versions do run Professor X, and I don't think that's necessarily bad or anything, but it's not my preferred way to build it. But in the bottom right, we can see this is kind of the archetype I'm talking about, which is you use magic to extend the game, you lock them with Dr. Octopus, Green Goblin, White Widow, Titania stuff. Some run X. You can do it with X and Debris. You have a lot of ways of closing down a lane, and then you win another lane with like your Red Hulk or your Cannonball. Though you definitely want Shang in these lists. I think the Shang versions are better than the Professor X because you want to be able to clear the Dr. Octopus lane if they're bigger than you.
What would you sub?
No, I would just take out X for Shang.
Yeah.
I think that Ravonna goes without X. I put Nocturne in. But yeah, those 2 card changes are the only changes I made to my list. And I really liked that list. Like it's one of my more favorite decks to play. If you like Lockdown at all, highly recommend. It's more Clog than Lockdown, but I view them as a similar thing. And I find it a bit more fun than the Annihilus Clog because it's less openly telegraphed.
It's really good into both Patriot and Hela, so it's kind of got a good spread on 2 very popular decks that typically are difficult to beat.
Yeah,
Hela. Like this is probably the best deck into Hela.
This farms Hela. This is really very, very good into Hela. The one Evazord was playing actually runs Super Skrull as well as a US Agent Cage package, and he even started including like more tech to beat Patriot. So he put in the Invisible Woman Killmonger, which is a really interesting addition because that catches like a lot of decks run 1-drops. And guaranteeing, even if you have Prio, that Killmonger going off to clear their drones, clear a Big Kitty Pride, clear an opposing Nebula. Like Killmonger, I think, is really quite good into the meta right now if you can find a way to squeeze it in certain decks.
So yeah, lots of different card choices for Lockdown too, but looks like with some of the top level play by yourself and that other name that I can't say I'm familiar with them. I'll have to look up the tweet. Maybe we're starting to get to a more refined list, which resembles the bottom without X.
Yeah, because I really haven't seen any of these other lists really, and I'm very surprised it categorizes them as Lockdown because they feel more just like
all those games were from May 9th to
I think it's just how Untapped groups a lot of the cards in Lockdown. Yeah, this is the list I was talking about that got number 1. And I think it's very like teched to the current meta. You do not need US Agent to play this kind of deck. Like, this is just a very teched out one iteration of it. But you do need Cannonball. Cannonball and Red Hulk, I think, are the two big ones of newer cards that really just push this archetype to the next level. Because Cannonball is like inverse Alioth, and Red Hulk is just the biggest stat stick in the game.
Yeah.
Well,
but it's good.
We talked about Hela, and it is still one of the best decks in the game. And this version that I have up here was the best performing version in High Infinite. I tried a bunch out, and I think it's also the best one. They're all pretty similar, really. I think that they're starting to get a little bit more creative, but this is probably the best stock version. It does significantly better than the versions with Black Knight. I experimented with Leech. I think that I know that there were a couple of versions that deviate from this a little more at High Infinite that you were commenting on last night in a stream, Zombies. So perhaps you can tell us what some of those choices are if you want to get a little bit lean in a little bit more into making meta-specific choices.
The main one I saw is Husky Puppies made one that it doesn't use Corvus. So if for whatever reason you did not pick up Corvus and you want to play Hela, that is an option. I believe it's very similar to the list we have here. It might even be card for card, just replacing Corvus with Colleen Wing. But I'm not 100% sure. But the shell is very much similar. He uses Blink, and the idea is, well, without Corvus, your odds of discarding Hela are dramatically lower. So he's trying to kind of mitigate the RNG downside of at least discarding your Hela. And it seemed to work pretty well. Husky's a really good player, and he is a Hela enthusiast. So if you're looking for Hela cooks, he is probably your guy. But he's done pretty well with it. I've seen a few other people playing it. Seems like a solid way to go about it if you get a little annoyed at your Corvus or if you just don't have Corvus. Because the deck is actually relatively budget if you cut Corvus. It's like, what, you have one Series 5 card and the Season Pass card.
That's what I hit Infinite with last month. I think instead of Blink, it was maybe it was Ghost Rider or something else, or I don't remember. But it was it's solid.
Yeah, Hela's still good. I mean, I think it got a little worse because of Leech, but Leech didn't like delete Hela or anything. And it's very funny. So like Hela is one of those cards that a lot of people hate, and I understand why a lot of people hate it, and I can like empathize with it. But it's really funny reading like the dev answers about Hela in particular, because they flat out told us recently, like, yeah, Hela doesn't even have a 50% win rate in their stats. She has an okay cube rate, but apparently her internal stats seem a lot worse. So they're kind of like, I feel like they're shaking their head and not seeing the same thing as some more engaged players are feeling with Hela. And I feel like it's kind of like Loki in that regard, where it just performs better, I think, at a higher level than, although not for the same reasons as Loki. I think the reason it performs better at a higher level is because people can't reasonably predict your outcomes as easily. And that's why Loki is good too, is because you can't predict exactly where all the Hela stuff is going to land, right? You can try and plan around it, like, oh, if Magneto goes left, what happens, and so on and so forth. But you don't know, and because the opponent doesn't know. Nobody knows where things are landing unless you like full stack a lane, then things won't go there. But
people
people
are more disciplined at top of ladder too. Like, for example, if I'm playing against you and I play Quinjet and into, let's say, Coulson into Loki on 4, and I snap you on 4 before I show you my Loki, you have a pretty good idea of what's coming and what it's going to do. Same thing with Hela. Like, when they snap you, it's because they're going to discard cards that are not Hela. Yeah. And they're going to be able to stick a lot of points on the board. And you have,
or they discard and then they snap next turn. You're like, oh, you top deck the Hela.
Yeah. So it requires more discipline to play against these decks. And sometimes they'll just they'll just cheese you. Like yesterday on stream, I was playing Loki against Hela, the classic matchup that everyone loves. And I had a pretty good advantage with Hela, and I snapped, and they played Loki, and they got 4 cards. One was Black Cat, one was Corvus, one was Hela, and the other was I don't even remember what. But like they basically played my deck because they got the 4 key cards. And the odds of that were so low. So even when you play in a disciplined manner, you can still low roll. And I think people find that frustrating when you make the right read, but you just get punished anyways. Loki and Hela can both do that because of the variance, and that's it was a game of Marvel Snap cards.
Yeah, I think people find that particularly frustrating. But much like Loki, I feel like Hela, because of they view the stats internally, they're like, well, we aren't gonna nerf this card if it's not doing well. They only cave to sentiment so much, and I feel like Loki and Hela feel kind of out of bounds of that, at least from what I have seen and experienced.
Well, the next deck that we're going to talk about is your favorite deck in the game, Zombies. Loki.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. This is a version of Loki that performed well on High Ladder. It was popularized by KM Best. I don't remember the name of the person who originally played it. KX4N, I think it was. And I think what's really interesting about this version of Loki, this kind of just shows us how far gone the meta's taken us. There's no Shang in this list. It's running Nocturne, Mockingbird, and Red Guardian in sort of the flex slots. And I think that Red Guardian is good because it can function as ongoing hate. I think you said it before. I completely agree. I think you need to lean a little bit more in that ongoing hate. So you may want to consider Rogue or Enchantress. But
yeah, I love Enchantress right now. And Loki, like it just Enchantress is what Shang-Chi was, I feel like. It's the tech card that completely flips a game on its head. And I feel like we're past the point of Red Guardian. It's nice because it's more flexible and you have more good hits. Like sometimes if you nail a Jeff or a Angela or a Kitty, Red Guardian feels amazing because you are denying them a lot of power by doing that. Because it's messing with the Angela, it's messing with their scaling. They can't move the Jeff. It feels really good. Red Guardian's a great card.
Oh man, when it hits your invisible woman, you just cry.
Yeah, and it's so flexible, right? Because it's not limited to one card type. It's always generally good stats. But when you're up against like these Patriot decks or the other ongoing deck that got popular, the Gene Spectrum one, I find Red Guardian is not enough to like flip the game. I mean, sometimes it can, but I feel like given those decks like to stack their lanes, whether they're stacking the Gene lane so they don't have to play into it, or whether they're stacking the Patriot lane so they could like onslaught it or whatever, and then they just get hit by Enchantress and then they die. And so I've been big on Enchantress in Loki.
Yeah, when you look at the top decks that we just reviewed, Shang doesn't really have a lot of good targets.
No, he doesn't.
Hela, it does, but because of the way that the matchup works, you never get an opportunity to leverage the Shang. Lockdown,
and it's not enough sometimes.
You get basically locked out of the lanes that you potentially would want a Shang. Probably the most relevant Shang play is to hope that Darkhawk pulls it, but I mean that's kind of not really.
That used to happen more. That's kind of in part, I think, why the deck is getting a little better with less Shang around. Darkhawk has a smaller chance of becoming like a liability in terms of point power, which has been really nice for Dr. Octopus. So yeah, if you're a Shang-Chi hater, it's a decent time to be playing Marvel Snap. If you've ever wondered what the game would look like if there was less Shang-Chi, well, we're living in it. At least from my experience, I've barely seen one in the last week. Also, Leech hates him out a bit too, right? You're shanging on the later turns of the game. If you're sitting on that in hand and you get leeched, well, it's not doing very much. But more so, a lot of decks just aren't running Shang targets.
You know me. From my cold dead hands will you take Shang from my deck. I cut it for Nocturne just to do the weekend missions. I ended up getting Nocturne 3 keys, by the way. No already owned, so
Nice.
we dodged it. Although, frankly, I wonder if already owned would have been better than the Celine variant. But whatever. I've high rolled enough with my keys that I can't complain. I didn't miss the Shang, and it's just one less brick in the deck. So yeah, Mockingbird, I'm not a fan of it in Loki. I did a little bit of research on Snap.fan that publishes drawn win rate for cards in specific decks. Mockingbird outperforms my choice of Hope, so I think that it's probably correct, unless you're stubborn like
It's
me.
good. It's just,
Yeah,
it's very all or nothing. Like, you basically, I think you almost have to view Mockingbird as a pseudo tech card, because it's kind of like Shang in that respect, where
Right.
Shang either is doing something really, really good, or he's not being played because he's not impacting the game enough. And that's kind of the same thing with Mockingbird. Mockingbird lets you take advantage of sometimes location high roll, where you get it down for cheap. It's a really good top deck if you played Loki on 4 into spamming stuff on 5. And it's just surprising how Loki really appreciates being able to play a big thing sometimes, because Loki is a very small ball kind of deck. Like, most of your power is coming from Kitty, Elsa, Angela, or taking your opponent's cards and doing them for less. All the other cards in the deck are like 5 or less power. Most of them are like 3 or less. So I find that being able to play a tall thing, often for a reduced cost, is really good. And then when it's not really good, you just ship it away with Loki and pretend like it doesn't exist, like a tech card. And so I've found it to be quite nice. But it's one of those cards where I think it's a preference, and you can very easily, if you don't own Mockingbird, you can still play Loki fine without it. I think it just makes it a bit better.
Well, the next deck is the true cockroach of Marvel Snap. I swear these 12 cards have been playable for forever. And it's Destroy. Destroy is still a deck that, I mean, it's not, it's the definition of middling, but
Yeah.
it still
It puts
works.
up numbers. It works. It's a coherent strategy. It also probably appreciates the lack of Shang-Chi right now. Doesn't appreciate Leech a whole ton, but
Leech kind of
it
nukes
slows him
Zola.
down. It slows him down quite a bit, because they can't do cheeky Zola stuff. If you're leeching them on 4, that usually denies them at least one turn of destroying things, and they usually need all 4 or 5 of those turns of destroying things, right, to really get that snowball going, unless they got favorable locations. So it's fine. It's been fine, but I have not found it to be popular higher up on ladder.
Yeah, don't really have a whole lot to say about the deck. Really, it's
the same deck that's been around for like a year. When did it's been around since Nico, right? Nico is what pushed like the final destroy list, right? So I guess last year is when
October, right?
Yeah. Well, Nico, it started with X23 and then Nico cemented it. X23, I think, was the summer, and then Nico came with, I think, Elsa in October. And it hasn't changed, and it probably won't change. Like, someone was talking about, I guess they might be doing a symbiote season in the summer or something. I don't know. Heard someone talking about that. Like, oh, they're going to print something for Destroy. And then I was just like, what do they print for Destroy? Like, what is this deck? What is good enough that actually makes you cut a card from this deck? And I don't know. I don't know what card you make that. I mean, you could give them another Destroy piece, I guess, but I don't know what kind of card you would design if you're trying to make another Destroy card. Because like Nico and X23 are like the pinnacle of like cards that were just made for Destroy, and really kind of push the deck to like a more competitive level. Because Destroy was quite bad for a long time. It used to be kind of like memed on, but now it's real and it's solid. It's around.
Well, the next deck is Darkhawk, and I really struggled to find a list that there's lots of different variations of this deck. Some of them run a Nihilist, some of them don't. This is more of like a bounce one. I think Yo Woody was playing it, or Husky Puppies at the top.
Woody has a list like this, but he changed it. He runs Werewolf now, and he runs it like a Werewolf bounce deck with the Darkhawk package instead of the Annie stuff. Unfortunately, it seems a little soft to Leech. Also, as we've talked about before, Werewolf is a card I think people, especially higher up, love to play with because it feels very rewarding. But I find for the average Snap player, like, there's so much room for making mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And if you play perfectly or whatever, you're not rewarded with a crazy higher win percentage like you used to be with the card. So I find it's not really worth it for a lot of people, but I do think it's a fun card and a skill testing card.
It's so
this
much
is more
worth.
typical of the Darkhawk stuff, although I think Black Widow is not good, but the rest of this is pretty standard. You run the Annie package, you run the Darkhawk package, you run Beast to bounce some of these cards and replay them. Pretty standard. So some Darkhawks have transitioned to running Leech and Blink, because that can cheat out your Darkhawk or your Annihilus, or they sometimes run a 6-drop, Red Hulk, have you, that kind of stuff. But there are a lot of different versions. It's solid. Darkhawk isn't going anywhere. It's a good deck.
So originally, I wanted to talk a little bit about the new cards coming out, but since we've been, well, we had a lot to talk about, perhaps we can skip those and talk a little bit about the patch that came out the week prior to the OTA. And I think that there's a lot to talk about because while there wasn't any real balance changes, there was quite a bit of game economy changes and just general features and interactions. And I think that I'm gonna give a little bit of a discretion here. Viewer discretion is advised. There are some things that we were happy to see. There were some things that we thought were problematic, and yeah, so we can go through it.
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. So first, we'll talk about something good. The location Fogwell's gym is now a permanent fixture in the game. That's kind of neat.
Double boosters.
I mean, I don't understand why it took so long to arrive, but we did. Yeah, Fogwells.
Well, I mean, they used to treat it as a reward for like special occasions, right? And
they ran it once for the game's anniversary and then never again. And
yeah,
people really liked it and were wondering if it was in the game still, and they were like, no, and people wanted it to be, and now it is. So cool. It's one less location to annoy you.
Yeah, good. We could use more good locations.
Just don't storm it. Don't storm it.
No, don't storm it. Don't legion
it's a crime.
It. Don't do.
Well, you could legion it, but you don't.
No, don't
it doesn't
legion
multiply.
It away. Yeah.
Yeah. Someone hypothesized if they stacked with Legion, how funny that would have been, but it doesn't work.
That's too bad.
Would have been glorious.
That'd be hilarious.
So this next feature, I didn't even want to talk about it, but I think that it warrants a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You can now purchase borders for your cards.
Yeah.
Different colored borders.
Yay.
You can purchase
Woo-hoo.
neon yellow borders, or white neon, or green neon, or purple neon, which looks like pink. They look good. I think they look great. I think that the costs are high. I think that the other thing that makes the cost prohibitive is that when you buy a border, you do not get it across all of your cards. It is purchased per character. So
yeah, that's insane. That's totally bonkers.
So if I buy for 500 gold the green neon card for Iron Man, I can use it on any Iron Man variant I have, but I can't use it on Iron Lad. So it's for each card. So if you want your entire deck to be blinged out with custom borders, you're going to be spending a lot.
Minimum 6K if you're buying the cheaper ones.
Yeah, that's
like 6K gold money. Is like a lot. Yeah, it's expensive, and one piece of feedback I've given, especially about the fact that it's per card, is that the cards in this game change too often to feel like, even if you're a cosmetic focused person who wants to bling out your deck, unless you're playing a deck that seems to never ever see an adjustment, like destroy or something, it's so unsafe to invest these resources, because like cards change all the time, and we might be one patch away from you suddenly not having a great time with this deck you invested a lot of time and money into making all fancy. And that kind of rubs me the wrong way. It just feels like the opposite. The game wants you to get invested in your cards and make them look cool and stuff, but the balance philosophy, I feel like, is very opposed to that with how often they change things. So I've found it difficult to want to engage with things like this, because even if I was willing to pay the money for it, it's just like there's too much uncertainty. I would feel really bad if I spent money on making a deck look nicer and then my deck is made irrelevant because I'm not getting that gold back, and I'm stuck with borders I might not use anymore. And it's a pretty big feels bad. It also is, this should have just been one price, man. Come on, you really had to like double up on the ones that look better with inked and gold cards. It's a little silly. And
they let us do it. You know what? I tell you, if they would let us do it as a one-time purchase, like, sure, I'd go through and buy all of them. But
well, they'd probably be way more expensive, right, if they went for like all your cards. But I would still prefer that, because then you're not worried about the balance, right? Because you can just put it on other cards. Like it's not as big of an issue. It's a bigger purchase, but you're guaranteed to get your value out of it. And their kind of defense was, well, we did it this way, so these are small enough that we can provide them as rewards in the future. And I think it's such a cop-out. You didn't do this because you wanted to provide them for rewards. You did this because you know it is probably going to make you a lot more money nickel and diming like one by one, rather than, because if someone buys one border they like, that's it. They're done. They made their purchase and they're good. Mm-hmm. Whereas if someone really likes that copper or gold border and they want to bling out multiple decks, you're going to make a lot more money off of that person. So I found it funny that was the reason they chose to air out. And that it particularly annoys me because, like, if that is true, you should have waited to launch this feature with whatever thing is going to let people have access to the feature. Like, if you are going to give it out in rewards, maybe launch the feature when you're giving it out with a reward. I don't know why this is such a hard concept. Like, people feel bad when they can't engage with a feature, or they feel like it's against their interest to engage with a feature, but they would feel less bad if they could engage with that feature. The emotes were a great example of this. Locking emotes behind albums, people were really unhappy about that because they got excited for emotes, and then they were like, oh, I guess these aren't for me. I can't use them. And now what? A few months later, you could get emotes through the store on their own. You can get them through the season pass. There are multiple ways to get emotes. They're not all locked behind these expensive albums. Yeah. And I think people are much more positive about it. So, like, I wish I could think they would learn from this, but I don't think they will. In that, if you actually plan on launching if you plan on providing something like this as a reward, and that's your justification, maybe launch it when that reward is actually going to exist in game, instead of having to tell people, don't worry, we're going to do this. We don't know when, and we don't know how, or we're not going to talk about how or when, but it's going to happen sometime between now and the heat death of the universe. So it's okay. And I don't know, that just, I don't really like that logic, because it just feels like we keep getting kind of, the only thing they want to add to the game is monetization, and people are very hungry for something, I don't know, to make their Snap experience a bit different than just, the new card releases or what have you. And so when we keep just getting monetization stuff, I think it starts to get a little tiring after a while, because, like, the albums, the emotes, all this stuff is monetization, and it's fine. Make money off of cosmetics and whatnot. I don't care. I'm not going to engage with this system, but like, sure. But people hope that, eventually we get something that doesn't have to be overly monetized because you're making more money from all this other stuff you're adding to the game. And if you, or on the other hand, you make the game cheaper because you're making more money, but they're not doing that.
Yeah.
Well, it's too bad. I really like the blue border a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I wish that I could deck my decks out in it, but like, it's like a year's worth of like battle passes for blinging out one deck. Not quite, but several months of battle passes. Like, it just can't.
It's just a lot to ask.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a bummer. But to juxtapose that bummer, there was a really nice feature edition that I've been enjoying a lot. That's kind of very relevant for my play experience. That kind of counterbalances this pretty well, which is with the new customizable card feature, basically any split you get on a character can be applied to any variant you own. So what we have on screen here is one of my favorite characters, Lockjaw, the famous drooling dog that's now fairly playable. And the variant is Dan Hip with the gold background with the rainbow crackle. I got that on the good boy Lockjaw, which is the Lockjaw that destroys the room with all the clothes. And I can now put that on any Lockjaw that I own. And that's pretty sweet. I had a really cool split on Kitty Pryde, inked with the red crackle on the Hellfire variant. I can now put that on my Kim Jacinto Kitty Pryde. Pretty sweet. I really like this change.
Yeah, I mean, when custom cards were first announced, they seemed very opposed to actually doing this. From what I remember, there were quite a few things that people asked about if they would be doing with custom cards, and they were like, no. And then they ended up doing those things, or something like similar to those things. And this is one of those things where it didn't sound like they were going to do something like this, and then they did, and it's great. It's very nice, and I think this kind of comes hand in hand with the border stuff in a way, because I think the border stuff helped influence this decision, right? Like, maybe this is the free bonus thing we got, is that, well, if we want to sell people on borders, we should make it easier for, if they have a good split, to put that on whatever variant they want so they can buy a border for it. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if that was like kind of the thought process there. But it's good because you don't have to pay to engage with this feature. This is just something you have access to, and it's nice. And you no longer have to worry about like getting a split on a version of the card you don't play, which is kind of a fringe thing, but it could be relevant. And yeah, it's nice to see if you have a bunch of variants for a card, you can actually like put them to use, change it up once in a while. I still wish they would give us a randomized feature to like randomly select it, but
that would be cool. I think that splits are still somewhat emblematic of kind of illustrating that you play with a card a lot.
Yeah.
You need to brute force them, and there are people who do. I affectionately refer to them as split whales, but most people aren't split whaling. It's actually objectively one of the worst ways of using your gold is to put them into to buying boosters, especially now with the new booster shop that they put in the last update, which was also a great change. So I feel like, when I have like a blinged out deck, it's just because I've been playing it a lot. And I like that kind of, it reminds me of the character mastery in Runeterra, where like the more that you played a character in Runeterra, you get like a ranking on the bottom of their card, and like you could see if someone played a lot of Teemo or Nami or whatever character. And I thought that was really cool. And in Runeterra, you really couldn't buy that. It had to be earned through play. So there's still, typical Snap, there's always a shortcut. But yeah, and the fact now that I'm encouraged to I think they also did this because, if I have a good split on Lockjaw, am I going to buy a new Lockjaw and start splitting it? Or am I just going to say what I have is good enough? Where now I can say, oh, cool, a new Lockjaw. I can look at my killer split on it. I'm more likely to maybe buy additional variants for that card. So I think that
I've seen that work too. Like I've definitely seen people engaging with variants that are new more because like, oh, I like this art and I already have a really cool split for the character and it's a character I play a lot. So yeah, maybe I'll get a new thing to use or whatever. It makes sense. It's sensible.
Well, I commit to you and the Born to be Cosmo listener viewers. It's a bit of a redundancy. I can't speak. I'm in my delusion hours. My inked green crackle pixel Thanos, which I could now put on any Thanos, I will commit to continue to use that Thanos when I play Thanos. I have no idea why I split that card. I have no recollection of doing so, yet it is in my collection. I will run it now in perpetuity.
As you should.
That's great.
Yeah. So yeah, pretty cool feature, and kudos. I enjoy. I don't think that there's anyone that has engaged with this and said I don't like this. I think it's been universally appreciated, or for those that don't care about splits,
just irrelevant. Yeah,
irrelevant.
They don't care either way, and
Blade doesn't care. Actually, Safety Blade likes it because he likes to put his cards to infinite. Now he doesn't have to put credits into them anymore. He just needs to do it once per card. So you know what? Even for him, even for our resident I don't like splits friend of the show, Safety Blade, and that is what he sounds like when he speaks. He'll confirm this for you in chat or comments. Yeah, it's just something for everyone there. And you see, it's really easy to buy goodwill. Of course, in true second dinner fashion, what goodwill we gets taken away. And this is why I advised caution. And this is the limited release of the Leagues feature in Europe. We'll call it a beta, although it's kind of a limited release. But what it did do was give us a chance to learn more about how Leagues function. Now, just before we go into how it functions and why we universally dislike it, NHL in our private group chat posted the funniest thing, but actually got me to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole, which was when you saw NHL that Leagues was released, you posted a screenshot of a mobile game that literally did the same thing, saying every mobile game literally does this.
Yeah.
And I went down the rabbit hole because I'm like, no, it can't be. What game is this? And so I Googled like mobile game league leaderboard, and I couldn't. I still not sure what game you posted. I think I might know what it is, but good grief, was I disappointed to be wrong in that assumption. It literally is every mobile game.
So that's why they're trying to do it. So maybe we can give a quick rundown of what people are looking at and what leagues are and whatnot for the unaware. This meme is great, by the way. Shout out to Raven for it. I really like it. But yeah, they tested this in the UK and I think maybe one other European region a few days ago. And well, it went over kind of as expected, I think, which is the pay to win elements here are very high. And the main reason for that, you can see a thing at the top here. It says 2 times point boost. So leagues, they're a bonus thing. It's not a new mode. It's not the new mode that's coming or whatever, entirely different thing. Leagues are essentially just a short little bonus thing. These seem to be like 2-day things where when you're playing Snap, you will earn or lose points in addition to your conquest games or your ladder games that count towards leagues. And the game is going to pair you with 29 other people who, according to them, they're trying to pair you with people who play a similar amount and have a similar level of skill. I don't know how true that will be based on prior experience with the matchmaking, but I digress. The goal is to have similarly skilled players in this environment, and whoever gets the most points at the end gets the most rewards, and everyone gets something for playing. But the thing is, like, I think if you want more than boosters, you have to be like top 20 or top 15, which probably isn't that hard. But it's weird to me that they view boosters as like the lowest tier reward when they're so like you couldn't give them like a 50 credit sympathy thing instead of boosters. Boosters are so bad, man. They're so worthless, especially when they're random. But rewards aren't the true problem. The problem is the pay to win elements. So there are two perks they have in this mode, and you gain points per cubes. The more cubes you're gaining, if you win a game, I think you get 100 points, and then I believe it's 25 points per cube won or 25 points per cube lost. I believe that's the rough structure of it. However, you can buy perks, and these change the game. So everyone can activate these once for free. That's, try before you buy. And you get 30 minutes of time, real time, where you can either get double points or you can't lose points. So you lose cubes or you lose points if you lose cubes, right? But if you activate this perk, if you lose, suddenly your points aren't going down. They can only go up. And that is really the more broken ability compared. I mean, the double points one is really good, but that other one is so insane. And just thinking about this for less than 5 minutes, it becomes apparent how easily abusable this system is. Like, all pay to win elements aside, this is a really abusable system. Yeah. Like, you can, it doesn't matter where you're at. So let's say you're not infinite yet and you're still getting bots. You could go out of your way to try and tank your MMR so you get worse players and bots. And if you activate that can't lose points thing, you can intentionally be conceding games until you get a bot and then maximizing your cube rate. Another thing, it works in Conquest, surprisingly. So this could have an impact on Proving Grounds.
That's what I mean. Want the aliens Proving Grounds.
Yeah, will people still be snapping for 8 in Proving Grounds? Or during leagues, are you going to get less people doing that because they don't want to risk losing stuff? Or is that where people will farm because they'll play Proving Grounds with the shield on, and that way if they lose, they don't lose anything. If they win, they gain 8. That's infinitely more effective than just playing on ladder, right? Where you're not getting nearly as many 8 cubes. It's just like, it's a very abusable system. And the thing is, there's no incentive in Marvel Snap for increasing your MMR, climbing higher into infinite. There's no incentive for any of that, which some people like that, some people don't. But regardless of how you feel about there being no incentive, when there is no incentive, now that Leagues is giving an incentive, there is an active incentive to like essentially throw games. So when you get a league, you potentially run into worse players. Like, if I'm thinking as a free-to-play player who really values that number one reward being a spotlight key, being so much better than the rest of the rewards, which are just like a variant, some credits, some boosters, I'm going to do everything I can to get that key because that's one of the most valuable currencies in Snap. So the game is like incentivizing you towards trying to abuse it.
Cost of the key again?
I don't know. I think in terms of like if you're buying progression and buying enough to get a key, I think is like $40 or $50 or a week's worth of progress. I think that's the rough estimate. That's what I remember it being.
Even if it's less than that, it's still a major jump up from even second place.
Yeah, no, it's huge. It's huge. And I think the intention here, like in other mobile games, is if you have that special thing for number one, I think that the goal here is it's almost like a bidding war where you try and bait somebody to you bait two players into both buying perks to try and pass each other, right? Like if you get two people who are willing to spend and they have to keep spending to compete with each other, and it's like a vicious cycle. But the really strange thing is that even though this is pay to win and everyone hates it for that, the incentive isn't hugely there for the whales unless they just really care about having that number one spot. Whales have more resources than they know what to do with. that extra spotlight key is going into a bag of like 50 of them. They're not hurting for keys. So
they are hurting for internet reps. So
and so to them, gold is a lot more valuable for like bundles or cosmetics or borders or whatever than buying points in a league. So a lot of the whales I know, they're like, I don't find this appealing at all because the rewards aren't worth using my points. And so it's like, if you're not even baiting the whales with this, like, who is this for? Is it just to bait people who don't really know better and burn their gold as a result? Maybe. But it just seems it's been the perks for gold has super overshadowed anything potentially positive about leagues. And I think it's led to a lot of frustration that this is something that has probably taken up a decent amount of development time. And I think their goal was they wanted people to view this as like a bonus thing, like, hey, you're getting some of these free rewards. You don't really have to do anything different. Maybe their goal is just to get people to play Snap a bit more for those 2 days or whatever. But instead, people saw this pay to win feature. And it's really funny because when they announced this in game, so the news came out, we knew leagues were coming, but like the full info came out about it during the day the league testing started, and then they put out an announcement in game like a couple hours later after people were already upset about the pay to win elements. And the really funny thing about it is in their league's overview, like after a whole day of everyone talking about how uncompetitive and pay to win it is, they really emphasized a lot how leagues are supposed to be this fun, competitive thing. And like for a game that very much markets itself as not being a competitive game, I was surprised at how much language they used saying like, hey, leagues is supposed to be this competitive experience. Because it's not. It's fundamentally uncompetitive in the current form. And so it comes off as very disingenuous when they try and brand it as this competitive thing, because it's trying to do that thing that Marvel Snap is really good at, which is making something seem like it's competitive when it's not. We've talked about that before with Conquest being a really good example of that. And this is just another thing, but it's like if you could pay to win Conquest, it'd be like if you could, if you get knocked out of Conquest, you could pay some gold to keep your run going or something. Like
right.
It would completely remove any kind of like, hey, yeah, I actually feel like I accomplished something here. And the really weird part of it is I'm sure a lot of people, especially more casual players, will probably have a fine experience with leagues, because I think there is a lot of the player base who just is not going to engage with these perks outside of the one free use. So there will be players that don't have a problem with it, assuming it launches as is. But I know for me, this is a feature I just don't think is going to add anything positive to my Snap experience. And the pay-to-win stuff leaves a really negative taste.
You already saw the tweets, people saying like, "Oh, first place in the league."
So, yeah. It's like people are bragging about it. It's like it just, I don't know, man. It really rubs me the wrong way, and I think this feeds into the cycle of people getting frustrated that every new feature apparently has to be monetized to death. Like this could have been, they took what could have been a cool bonus thing and they made it something people actively don't like because they decided they needed to find a way to potentially monetize it, because God forbid we give a few like crumbs of rewards away for free. The economy can't handle it, guys. It's falling apart. It can't hold itself together if we don't include these gold things. Now, they did say in the post, hey, this is a test and we're looking for feedback. And the more pessimistic among us might say, well, they always start with a worse version, so that way they can reel it back and make it look more reasonable while it's still not bad. Well, it's still not great. Maybe that's what they do. Maybe it's not. I would hope that with such a viscerally negative reaction, that they fundamentally reevaluate this whole point thing. Points aside, this already is just a very grindy thing. And I think that will be a turnoff for some players, but I guess you can just ignore it. It's not that big of a deal. They did something like this in beta called Cube Rush, and they rewarded a special title for people who could get the most amount of cubes over like, I don't know, it was like a 1 or 2 week period or something. Man, it's crazy how much grinding people did in that competition. So there will be people who grind leagues really hard, and hey, if you enjoy that, more power to you. But I do think that's already like the fact that you have in general, if you're a decent player, you have a pretty big advantage if the time is on your side, already makes it like not necessarily the most competitive experience, but then the pay to win just completely blows it out.
So you're more plugged into a lot of the Snap discourse than I am, and Nate is. I'm curious, anytime something like this happens, you have a vocal contingent of people that are going to be very much of a different opinion than the one we hold here. And because we don't have that represented here, I am curious if that existed with this announcement, because I feel like perhaps it's just the bubble that I'm within, but I feel like this is the first time in a very long time where there was a lot of detraction and not a lot of support. So like the gamut of engagement went from neutral to bad. Is that consistent with your experience as well?
Yeah. I think we've seen a general transition in Snap to where people are willing to be more critical of the game now that the honeymoon phase is worn off and different monetization avenues are being explored for additional things. This in particular, there were even I think people who adamantly defend a lot of things about the game were like, nah, I can't defend this. Like, it's just kind of indefensible. You know, you get a handful of like random people on Twitter who are like, well, it's only bonuses and I'm probably not going to super engage with the feature, so I'll take it. It's giving me technically more stuff for free, so whatever. But there were very few of those people in my experience. Like in general, people were very put off, and I think part of it is people are very antsy about like, you know, a supposed new mode coming in presumably sometime this year, though they haven't been super specific about when or what it is, just that a new mode is coming. I think people are kind of antsy waiting for that, and then seeing something like this, if they're willing to implement a pay to win thing like this in leagues, what's to stop them from doing the same thing in the new mode? Like, I think one of the, you know, for all its flaws and pros and cons of Conquest, one thing I think there was a little bit of a concern about but was completely waved away was, remember when we saw Conquest tickets cost gold? Yeah. And we were like, oh no, are they going to make us like pay to engage with this system? And then we saw, oh no, there's Proving Grounds, which is free. And then eventually you get the tickets through the caches too and whatever. But Conquest, there's no paying element to Conquest. I mean, maybe somebody buys the ticket, I don't know. But I feel like the vast majority of Snap players aren't paying gold for these tickets that they can get very easily.
Like Arena and Hearthstone, it was like, you know...
It's even more free to play than Arena and Hearthstone, right? Because that even costs like gold.
You couldn't pay to win in Arena and Hearthstone. You could pay to lose like 0-3 over and over again. I did before I stopped engaging with the mode. But yeah, no, it's although I think there's too many stages, it's not.
Yeah, Conquest is not. Conquest has a bunch of flaws, and that's also something maybe we can talk about next time. Is like, I'd love to talk more about. One argument I've seen, like everyone wants a new mode, but a point I've seen some people bring up is, what if the new mode is just essentially another Conquest, not the same game mode, but what if it has a similar like reception as Conquest did, where people really like it at first and then gradually seem to like it less over time? Do we like, really, is a new mode actually going to deliver on what people want it to? And I don't know, and none of us know, right? Because we don't know what this new mode is and whatnot. But I do think it's very interesting because I think a lot of people, for one reason or another, feel like they aren't as like into Snap as they were a couple months ago or however long ago, and they're really hoping that new game mode kind of revitalizes that. And I think that's going to be a big like make or break point for not everybody, but I think there are quite a few players where it's going to be like, hey, if this new mode doesn't really make me, you know, as excited to keep engaging with the game in a new or interesting way, like maybe that's a sign that this just, I've had my fun and I'm gonna call it a day. Which you hope that's not the case, but like I wouldn't be surprised if it was. And so this league stuff really, I think it just plants a bad seed of, well, if they're going to do this here, are they going to do this in the new mode? And if they do, the reception's going to be a whole lot worse than Leagues, and Leagues was already bad. Mm-hmm. But the feature isn't out yet. I think people have been very vocal about how they feel. One thing that has changed in the Snap community is people are not afraid to give a negative opinion about the game. They used to be. People would not speak out about like things they didn't like with Marvel Snap initially. And I know this because, well, I did. And I got a lot of very angry people in the comments because of that early on. And it's funny to see over time how there are less and less of those people. And there are more people like,
they've all moved to, what was that game?
Marvel Rivals. Yeah. Oh my God. It's so... I literally tweeted out earlier, like, is this a thing with Marvel games? It feels like I'm seeing Snap launch 2.0 with how people talk about Rivals. Very, very clearly, it's an early honeymoon period where people seem super defensive of any critiques of the game outside of, they have this weird contract stuff where they tried to make content creators not be able to say anything negative about a game. And anytime you do that, that blows up in your face, and they've already had to come out and be like, yeah, we shouldn't have put that there, we're removing it, so on and so forth. Which, good, they should remove that, because that's like kind of access journalism, and that's bad. But it's crazy to me how some people are getting very offended and mad about other people pointing out that it's like an Overwatch-esque clone type of thing. And like, I don't know, I'm not super invested or interested. I don't even have a key, so I haven't even played the game. It looks okay. If you're into that type of game, you might have fun with it. It's free. Cool. But the discourse surrounding it reminds me a lot of Snap at the beginning, where if someone says something negative about the game for whatever reason, so many people are like jumping in and being just getting very combative about it. And I'm just like, this feels like Snap, where in like a year people will be like, oh, it's great, and then a year later when they get bored, they're gonna tear it a new one. I'm just like, I've seen this before, and I was just wondering, is this a common trend in Marvel games? Because I like Marvel stuff, but I'm not the number one Marvel super fan. I don't keep up with all the games or all the media or whatever. And so like I tweeted that earlier. I was like, is this a common thing? And generally the consensus I got seems to be kind of, which I found kind of interesting. Someone actually
in Pokemon.
Yeah, and Pokemon's a great comparison because it's a similar thing as Marvel, where it's one of the biggest intellectual properties in the world. So a lot of people get very invested in that, and then it becomes kind of an aspect of their personality. So they take it more, if you critique this thing, it feels more like a personal attack rather than someone critiquing a product. And I feel like that's exactly what we saw in Snap in the beginning. And I feel like that's what I'm seeing now with this game. Because, like, I'm saying all this, I don't actually think anything super negative about that game. Like, people seem to have fun with it. I'm happy for them. I hope it works out very well. I would like that game to do well if people enjoy it, right? Like, more power to them. But it's someone, I'm trying to find it. Someone had a really interesting thing where I think a lot of people really, because they're so invested in, these characters or whatever, they don't like other people like trying to tear that down or I don't know. I think really the main thing is the people get personally invested and make it like a part of them. Because I mean, I feel like that's kind of an encouraged thing with some of these bigger brands. Pokemon's a great example of that. Like, I feel like I've seen that a lot in Pokemon community.
Or maybe not so much anymore, but like back in the day, like when the PlayStation 3 came out and Sony was like in a real rough spot because of the CD rootkit fiasco and a few other things, like there was a contingent of like voracious Sony like supporters, like die in the wool. And I was like,
oh, those people still exist on both sides. The console wars is still alive and well, because there will always be like 14-year-olds who are ready to argue for their plastic box and why it's
like,
better.
Back then, like the PlayStation 3 was such a fiasco its launch. Like it ended up becoming a fine console in the end, but like it was like people really had to put themselves in a pretzel to like, you know,
yeah, to justify it, like, and
Sony
so
a pass.
yeah, exactly. And I feel like we see that kind of thing. I think it's just a prominent thing. I don't think it's really unique to Marvel. It's just you get more of these things the bigger the IP is, and Marvel just happens to be one of the biggest. Oh yeah, this was good.
I mean, so I've seen it with like, you know, I'm an old man. I saw it with Nintendo and Sega. I saw it with, you know, Sony versus everyone else. I saw it when Nintendo was at a low point with the Wii U.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned Pokemon. I will say that I feel like the demographic of those who behave that way with Marvel skew older.
Mm-hmm.
So they're behaving like the 14-year-olds, but they're 40. And
the comic book guy trope.
Yeah,
kind of.
And it's
The Simpsons.
It has an intensity that even surprises me at times. Like I remember one time I saw someone giving someone a hard time on Twitter because they weren't happy with a balance change, or so, I can't even remember what it was, and I quote tweeted them, and I was like, look, like most people, you know, you're dealing with a vocal minority. Most people agree with your take, and like I had a bunch of people unfollow me, like publicly, like blast me, like DM me, like they're like, we're never gonna watch the show again. I'm like, oh, okay, like nobody watches the show anyway, so you know, I mean, I know it's not true. There's a small contingent of people who do, but like the point is that I'm like I don't even know what I said that was so controversial. You know, it's like water's wet, and it's like I'm a desert supporter, and how dare
yeah, it's
the poison toxic virtues of water. Like I don't know, it's just weird. Just a very weird kind of thing to be so invested in, and well,
it's just not worth generally arguing with people about it online. Not. It's such a because most of the time you're not going to convince somebody. It doesn't matter how good of an argument you have. If someone's like really set on feeling a type of way about a game or whatever, like it's usually very hard to actually convince people to change their perspective. A lot of people just want to argue. They want something to do. This is what
I mean, sure.
Twitter
then
is
they don't
for.
Have to play Marvel Snap.
Yeah.
Well, people like to be angry about stuff.
But like, I'm not kidding about them arguing. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
And Twitter's become such a piece of garbage hellscape. It's decreased in quality by so much. I feel like while this might have happened in Hearthstone, like the algorithm kind of like suppressed it, at least from my feed, whereas now it's like toxic garbage, like bring it to the forefront, you know. So it's like the worst Marvel Snap takes, like Christy Gnome shooting her dog, and like, you know, whatever like crazy disgusting thing is happening in Canada. That's like my Twitter experience.
I haven't logged in like 3 weeks.
Well, you're not missing much.
Anything,
maybe that's part of it too, right? So but yeah.
So that's the league's fiasco, and all we can do is we don't even know when they're joining the game fully, because like
well, probably not as originally planned after this reception.
I don't know. It all depends on how easily they can pivot on, because the core structure of leagues is probably fine to leave as is. The only thing people are mad about are the perks. Like if you can tweak the perks, which shouldn't be hard to do, it's more so it's not that it should be hard for them to do this, it's are they willing to do this? That's really like the line. And I can say I don't think I've seen a single person who's a content creator have really anything positive to say about this feature, and that's not great for your game, right? Like when the people who are most engaged and who are sharing your game with like various people are like, yeah, this sucks. Like, I don't want to engage with this. It doesn't seem fun. I wish they put their resources on something better. That's not how you want like a new feature to go over, right? Especially one they were trying to pitch as like, hey, worst case, it's a bonus. Because generally people are pretty receptive to like, hey, here's a bonus, few extra credits or boosters or what have you. So hopefully all they would have to do to fix this is you could even keep the perks, but make them like, hey, you can use this once, or you can use this once a day or something. As long as you can't buy more of them, the perks suddenly become way less of an issue because everyone is on a level playing field. And that's all people really want. If you're going to especially go out of your way to call this new thing competitive, the least you can do is give people a relatively even playing ground, even though it will obviously still be a little slanted towards like, hey, if one person has, more hours to play than the other person, they probably have an advantage. But as is, it is competitive, but only in terms of seeing who can, rack up the charges on their card higher and faster.
Well, I had some unpleasant things to say about Twitter, but once in a while, something nice gets posted that catches our eye, and I thought it would be nice to close on that. So on Twitter, Lauren, whatever, has a wonderful Twitter account and posts a lot of interesting content, but last week posted something that really caught our eye and wanted to share it with those that maybe didn't see it, which were some suggestions on how to buff the Black Kirby Crackle, and then kind of maybe how to buff Kirby Crackle in general, or to give it more variations therein. And I actually don't own any cards with the Black Kirby until very recently. I got my first Black Kirby on Elsa. Black, I understand, is the rarest of the Kirby Crackles, but it's also the least easy
visible.
to see.
Yeah,
least visible. And I think the Marvel Snap color palette's pretty dark, which I actually like because it's easy on the eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And on our screen here, one of Lauren's ideas was to give the Kirby an outline, which is a pretty common technique to make text more accessible or readable, as I learned from all my content creator friends that make thumbnails.
It's true.
It's and there's a picture of Valkyrie, my favorite Peach Momoko Valkyrie variant, with a Black Kirby with a rainbow outline on the different crackle bubbles. So like one's outlined with orange, one's outlined with green, one's outlined with blue, and it looks really good. I would like to have that. I think that a lot of people would. And Lauren had some other ideas in the thread, like a optimized crackle that kind of mirrors the card's color palette, so it might be like 2 or 3 colors, or that sort of thing, which I think is also pretty neat. But this outlined Black Kirby.
Oh, it's really cool.
I would love
looks great. It's really, really hard to see Black Kirby in the game. And it's really nice looking. It's just you're really squinting to see it. You can't even really tell on the board most of the time. So I love this suggestion. The developers have confirmed, we would like to make Black Kirby Crackle better. We aren't super happy with how it's like the rarest and also the least apparent. So I would love to see them incorporate Lauren's design, because I think this is just, I feel like there's not a whole lot of like fan design content stuff in Snap. There's like that one guy who posts mock-ups on Reddit that are really impressive once in a while. But outside of that, I've never really seen much stuff like this in the community. I thought it was really cool. I thought this was a very good suggestion, and she visualized it very well. Like, it's very easy to see, wow, this is a big difference compared to what I'm used to seeing on Black Crackle.
So Lauren Whatevs wins the Keep It Cosmo award for this episode of Born to be Cosmo. Will that be an award we ever give out again? It really depends on it.
Stay tuned to find out.
Yeah, how bad is Old Man Blue's memory? Stay tuned. It's not great. Spoilers.
Are we going to show the other thing?
I didn't take screen caps of them, but perhaps we can just pull it up on screen, or or I
Yeah,
can put the link in chat here. I'll send you the link to the thread, Nate. My apologies. I probably should have included them all, but
here I have the image.
I'm just pasting it in the chat. Thank you.
Because it's a really cool concept. Because this is what caught my eye, and then the Black Crackle was.
Oh, really? The other one caught my eye, but yeah, this looks great too.
Like, I think this was the initial post.
Yeah,
and then the Black Crackle was under it.
Yeah, this is like smart crackle to have the crackle kind of mirror the colors on the card, which looks pretty cool.
That's so the idea is if you having crackle be able to change the colors it uses based on the colors used in the character it's on. And I think these look really cool, and like Crackle already looks good, but this looks way better. It's kind of like how Rainbow Crackle looks great on like every card because it cycles through the colors. But this looks even better than that, I think. Like, I think this is really, really cool. And I mean, I don't know how you'd implement something like this if you make it maybe, you know what would actually be a great thing for this to do if, it ever comes out is like character mastery, right? That's a thing that is very involved with like being dedicated to a card and upgrading it a bunch and collecting the variants, or at least that's what it sounds like. So this could be something that would be, if they wanted to implement it, a very cool reward where it's like, hey, you could get a crackle that's like unique to your character with different colors. And I mean, everyone that I've seen responded very positively to this and thinks it would be a really cool addition to the game. Because people like the crackle stuff. It's fun to chase. And people already like, oh, if I got my Hela and I get the green crackle, it looks better because it like matches.
Yeah.
So something like this would be even cooler and give people a reason to like chase that stuff. So I think it's less important than the Black Crackle thing, because the Black Crackle like is already in the game and exists and can just be made better. Whereas this is probably more involved. But I really liked the visualization of like the idea here, because I would use this in game. It looks really good.
Yeah, I agree. It looks awesome.
Well, that gets us to the bottom of our agenda. We had to trim a little bit, but we kept the show hopefully under 2 hours post-edit, which is our nominal goal. But I want to thank you guys for agreeing to do the show on Monday. I know NHL couldn't be as active as he would have liked because he had a doggo that needed to be taken care of and might have been barking quite a bit. So still appreciate having NHL on. We'll need to have you back again soon when you've got less going on before you head back to Europe. I really appreciate you being here with us to contribute to the conversation. Hopefully we'll learn more about how leagues will be revamped in the future. I think on our next show, we had a look, Zombies and I, at the cards coming out in June, and some of them look really strong. So I think we'll likely talk about that. Plus, there's going to be an OTA, not next week, but the week after, which will kind of shake things up before Infinite Conquest. So we'll probably be back around then. Of course, we subscribe to flexible podcasting schedules, just like flexible series drops. Never let it be said that we're not inspired. Thank you all for those that hung out live with us, and for those that are either watching us on YouTube or listening on Spotify, Anchor, or Apple Podcasts. Appreciate you guys tuning in and listening to us ramble. Till next time, keep it Cosmo.
Keep it Cosmo.
Keep it Cosmo.
Enough said, bub.